Hello, my name's Gary Baker. I'm CEO of IAIA, and I'm here today to talk about a new report that IAIA is releasing called Improved Decision-Making for the Energy Transition, Guidance for Using Strategic Environmental Assessment. Now, this guidance comes at a critical juncture for us all. Indeed, not to get too grandiose, but for the whole planet, in terms of how we support strong and accurate decision-making when facing a tidal wave of new renewable energy projects. And why are we facing this tidal wave? Well, it's because the threat of climate change is forcing us to speed this transition from fossil fuels into renewable energy. The good news is that is indeed happening. The bad news is that some of the decisions that have been taken now, we will see the ramifications of later. And that's because in many, many jurisdictions, there's insufficient structure, procedure to be making confident, long-term, sustainable decisions. And that really is why we felt the need for a global guidance on the use of strategic environmental assessment, specific related to renewable energy projects. So to discuss that, I'm delighted to be joined by the co-authors of this new work, Barry Dalal-Clayton and Miles Scott-Brown. Both of them are very seasoned SEA experts who've covered many projects around the world, but really have also spent the last couple of years helping to collect and refine as much expertise as we could find in terms of producing this document. So welcome to you both. Thank you for joining me today. I'm just going to ask a couple of questions to try and get a flavor of what the document is, and then maybe a few other items that we may get into a little bit later. So if we start with some basics, perhaps, clearly SEAs have been around for many, many years. It's quite embedded in the systems in many countries. But perhaps for an audience that is less familiar, then what is a strategic environmental assessment? And also related to that, why do we feel a need for this sort of guidance now? Maybe one for Miles to start with.
Yes, strategic environmental assessment, now known perhaps more commonly as strategic environmental and social assessment, as you said, has been around for a long time. It is a high-level strategic look at policies, programs, and plans of government. And in this case, it was relating to energy transition. So the move away from using coal and fossil fuels as a primary fuel source towards renewable energy. And what we say in the guidance is this is widespread. It's in place in over 100 countries. And what we've found in our practice, and of course during completion of this work, one of the challenges is there's lots of guidance out there, but not specific to the energy transition. And many of these guidelines, although in place, are not in practice. So that was, I think, one of the first things that we came to conclude is the lack of practice to put SEA into place.
If we step back and look at, you mentioned that SEAs are in place in certain jurisdictions, but more broadly across the whole globe, I mean, how would you characterize the uptake of SEAs from, both Western world, global north, global south? Barry, one for you.
Well, I think we can go back to 1969 when in the USA they introduced the NEPA, the National Environmental and Policy Act, and that really paved the way. It introduced environmental impact assessment, and it did allow for looking at higher level instruments like policies and even laws, but practice actually rolled out predominantly for projects. And initially it was largely biophysical. Much later we added in the social dimension. And then in the late 1980s, the early 1990s, a number of developed countries started to introduce strategic environmental assessment. I'm thinking of the Netherlands and Canada and Australia, but that was the rich countries started. But then the European Union brought out its famous SEA directive in, I think it was 2001, and that has become binding and transposed into domestic law in all the member countries. I think there's currently 27 of them. And since then, it's expanded across the world with uptake in all continents. And as Miles mentioned, there are laws and regulations concerning SEA in over 100 countries and voluntary practice in many areas. But whilst the laws and regulations are there in quite a lot of jurisdictions, practice doesn't follow. Because to a large extent, there is a lack of awareness, particularly in higher echelons of government, and it's governments that are mainly responsible for initiating SEAs, and there is a lack of awareness at that level, and that still persists. And there's a lack of real domestic expertise and skills. And in many of those countries, it's largely the donors and the multilateral development banks that require SEA as part of their safeguards that finance and push it. So it's expanded. There is great interest around the world, particularly among the environmentalists and concerned people, but in government there's really not a lot of understanding of why they should do it and how they should do it, and that is something that we have to overcome.
So if we take that a step further, I mean, obviously this document specifically is trying to deal with its application within the energy transition and that process that we're undertaking. So what is it that you think SEA really brings specifically to that energy transition? What is going to be most helpful and most useful within it?
I think SEA is a process, first of all. It can use any number of tools that may be appropriate, and every SEA will be different, has to be tailored to context, needs, circumstances, and that requires a considerable amount of thinking as to how to make it work for the particular situation. But whatever process you end up formulating or designing, what it delivers to government, it allows them to make much better decisions and be more informed about what are the opportunities and the risks around environmental and social concerns, and how do you maximise the benefits of renewable energy whilst also minimising or avoiding or even mitigating the risks and negative aspects or impacts. So in having that better awareness and knowledge, governments can actually formulate much better policies and plans and programs for delivering the energy transition, for moving towards renewables. And that means because we're taking on board all these environmental and social concerns, we've got a much better chance of ensuring that the outcomes are much more sustainable than they would otherwise be. There's a widespread view that going green for green energy is the best thing to do. It's obvious, isn't it? Why wouldn't we? But it is not necessarily benign. We have to manage those risks and potential impacts. Otherwise, we can get really unsustainable outcomes which undermine the whole journey.
I think if I can add to that, Gary, for me, one of the challenges of energy transition is its scale, both in time and space. And while developed economies, we hear 2030, 2035, for many developing economies, that's not realistic. So we're looking 2050, perhaps even 2060. So that's 25, 30 years away. And then it's a massive change. It's a massive change from going from fossil fuels to renewable energy. And we can't plan from the bottom up. We cannot plan from the individual project level. So I think what we found was renewable energy in of itself it's a different cat, in terms of it's much more widely dispersed across the landscape than having a single coal-fired power plant. So as Barry said, it does have a huge number of impacts. And I think we need to look at a much higher level and take into consideration the combined cumulative impacts of basically going from removing coal into, we don't know, is it solar, wind? It's going to be very different depending upon the institution, depending on the country. So I think SEA allows flexibility in an approach, a strategic approach, to make decisions now that we can plan for the next 20 to 30 years of the energy transition.
You putting it like that, it all sounds incredibly compelling. So, if I'm going to play devil's advocate for a bit, what are the arguments that stand against it? What are commonly brought up that prevent or discourage SEAs from taking place? What are those arguments?
Well, I think like environmental impact assessment, which most people are aware of, is a project level tool. You've got your road or your new industrial development or whatever it is. And people often say, well, impact assessment is just a green brake, something that gets away of getting on with development. And I think some people make the same argument for SEAs. Governments want to get on and develop and roll out their policies and their plans, and developers want to follow up and invest in the opportunities for particular projects. And they don't want to have to wait for some process or some requirement to be gone through. So there is a concern there that a lot of people might have without understanding the benefits that really undertaking SEA would deliver. Two specific things I think often come up. Well, how much is it going to cost? And cost varies. It depends enormously on the complexity of the SEA. Are we dealing with multiple different policies? One recent one I was involved in Bangladesh had to address 89 different policies and plans because it was about all development in a region. That was very complex, and it took 18 months. It's very complex, but it had to be done like that. In other cases, you could even go do a rapid SEA in 2 or 3 months as a desk exercise. And you might get 80-90% of the issues on the table, but you can tailor it. But in general terms, a good SEA is going to take you something like 6 or 9 months, or even a year or more, and the costs are going to vary depending on complexity, between say $100,000 and up to $1 million or more. And sometimes it will depend, are you dealing with issues that are seasonal so that you have to wait and gather data over different seasons to have a look at the differences? And that means certain research, and it takes longer to do. And behind that, there's this issue I've already raised, the lack of understanding, particularly among non-experts, your decision makers, your planners, makes it a challenge that we have to overcome. We need to invest much more in awareness raising and training up front so that we can work with the people that are going to make the decisions and deliver the information they will value and use. And, the lack of domestic experience and expertise is another side of the same coin. So these are the kinds of issues that get raised, but I'm sure there are a lot of others that we could talk about.
So that discusses SEAs in sort of broad terms, but and there's an awful lot as people get a chance to sort of dive into this document. I think they'll see just how enormous the undertaking has been in terms of covering all of the major renewable energy options. But Miles, perhaps a question for you as to who do you see as the primary reader here? Who are we trying to really influence with this document?
Well, I think as Barry brought up the very good, important point of lack of capacity. And government decision makers really don't know much about SEA. They probably have not had much experience with it. So we think that the decision makers are the ones, and decision makers being not just politicians, but also high-level government officials working in civil service capacity, are the primary target. But it's more than that too, because I think these decisions also affect a wide range of stakeholders. I think developers are looking at this tool because they want to have more certainty in the landscape. Financiers, I think strategic assessment is a wonderful process for financiers to provide more certainty for investment decisions. So I think there's a whole wide range, but we look at decision makers as being the primary target of this guidance. And I think, as Barry had said, this isn't just a report. I think this is going to be guidance on many levels. It could be videos, it could be training, it could be courses. That's now the beauty of digital technology, is that we can reach much broader audiences at different levels and at different times.
And if I can just add one other thing, I do think that there's something for everybody in this guidance. The trick, and we've set out the details, and it's quite extensive. I mean, it's not going to be a bedtime read. I imagine people will delve into it for the bits that concern them, or that they're particularly interested in. If they're interested in a particular renewable energy technology, say wind, they'll go to that chapter. If they want to know how to conduct an SEA, well, there are one or two chapters about that practitioners can go to see what we've distilled from best practice all around the world. But I think our challenge is going to be to target different audiences with key messaging to excite them and invite them to even take a look at this and see what's in it that can be beneficial to them.
No, I totally agree. I think, that very much speaks to the next steps and what our ambition is for us. I mean, although despite all of this work that's gone in, and, this has taken 3 years to put together, if you will, it really gets us the starting line. It's what happens next that is so important as to we get this into the hands and we start to influence actual practitioners and people that are making these decisions. And unless we succeed in that, then it's been a lot of noble work for very little return. So, we are now in a phase of publishing this and really trying to solicit feedback, as soliciting interest. And that interest, I hope, is going to come, very much from countries outside of those traditional countries we talked about earlier. It's not just about global north, far from it. We need representation, we need interest, we need workshops in Asia, in Latin America, in Africa. And that's what I really hope we can achieve, particularly with the partners that we have. There have been a lot of organizations that have supported us in producing this document. And I think we're now in the phase where we hope to partner with these organizations, whether that's IFC, whether it's World Bank, Asian Development Bank, and many, many others. And we hope to be able to get this into countries and into policymakers' hands where it is going to start to make a difference. And as Miles said, that's going to include digital versions. It's going to include different ways of approaching it, whether that's infographics, maybe aimed at younger audiences, or specific energy type audiences. So we haven't got all the answers on this. This is a fantastic contribution, I believe, to the energy transition, but we've got an awful lot more work to actually bring it to life and make sure that it's actually of utility to as many people as possible. So let me just, maybe deal with one final question. I'm sort of always fascinated when people undertake these exercises, and you perhaps can't remember when you first started this exercise, given it was quite a few months back. But what could you describe? What have you learned most through the exercise? What is it perhaps that surprised you most about all this work you've done and this investigation?
For me, I've learned a hell of a lot, an enormous amount. We did a survey to start off with of what guidelines were out there across the world, and we found approximately 150 odd SEA guidelines of one sort or another, some across the board, some for specific sectors, and the quality of them varied enormously and the content varied enormously. But all of them had nuggets in them. All of them had built on some experience, either their own or from others. And so we were able to pull all that together and interact with a whole array of expertise around the world and bring in their knowledge and experience. So it's been a journey of many people pulling things together. And from that, I personally have learned a great deal, and I hope that will improve the way I can deliver when using SEA myself. So that's been probably the richest thing for me as an individual, has been what I've learned. The process has confirmed some of the views I held, that we really have to develop much better terms of reference. I review a lot of these things, and the main problem with SEAs that are either of poor quality or don't deliver what decision makers and planners really need is the poor terms of reference set in the beginning. And, these terms of reference are often set by people who don't necessarily understand or have never done an SEA themselves. So I think we need to improve on that. And practitioners who are appointed as consultants, they really need to interrogate the terms of reference at the very get-go and maybe discuss with the client, as it were, where there may be room for improvement in them. And usually there is. It could be any aspect of it. And that ties into the comments we were both making about the lack of awareness that persists in governments at senior levels amongst those that may be tasked with commissioning or using the outputs of SEAs. The SEA process has to have built into it at the outset, at the inception and scoping phases, much more attention to initial awareness raising and training of those who will receive and use and be involved in the SEA. I don't think we've done enough of that to date.
For me, Gary, it was the tremendous interest there is in this topic. And it's not just climate change. It's not energy transition. It's that perhaps strategic assessment can be the process that's actually going to work for what is needed. Yeah. And we've seen a lot in the history of environmental assessment. We cannot plan from the project level up. And we've seen a lot of the problems we've caused by going single project by project by project. The scale of this is such a huge thing across countries, across the globe. And I think that maybe this will be an opportunity to integrate the strategic assessment process with the land use planning and the project level impact assessment process and really integrate these decisions. One of the challenges with SEA is it's often too little too late. There's lots of SEAs done, but they're not necessarily implemented. And I think the private developers work on a different scale. They want to make decisions today. Governments are looking within either an election cycle. It's a different time frame. And I think the challenge here is how we can make this process work to do those linkages and provide more certainty for stakeholders that they know, as Barry said, this is not benign, but we're also going to be part of the energy transition. The impacts that are going to arise are going to be dealt with in a timely way, and that we can make decisions when they're needed instead of waiting for an impact situation to occur. And then it's a much different ballgame.
Yeah, I think that's very well said. And I think what has struck me about the guidance as well is that, yes, it covers the high level, if you will, of SCA, legal basis, history, etc., operation of how one goes about developing that process, but deals with the individual energy types as well, but also has sections on, the things that sometimes I think are overlooked or forgotten, the actual transmission lines. How do you get that into and out of, and what that impact of that is, and then how it all folds into, what you just described, Miles, that overall policy making aspect of whether that's spatial, whether it's energy. So there's advice in here for policymakers. There's advice for institutions as well that are engaged in this process. So it really is quite a comprehensive attempt to provide global guidance. And that's why I think it will have shelf life, but it also, really, 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 we want feedback in terms of what more we can do. How can this improve? Where should we go next? What are the spin-offs that we should be also considering and looking at?
You're absolutely...
Maybe, yeah, go on, Barry.
You're absolutely right about that, Miles. Gary. And it is worth probably saying that this isn't static. It's not the end of the journey. It's the end of the beginning, as somebody once said, a Mr. Churchill, if I recall. The next steps are to turn it into a rolling document that can be a rolling resource by putting it on the web as an online searchable resource and providing mechanisms to update it when it needs doing so, or add case studies or videos or commentary, and make it a live, living and renewable resource in its own right. So I think it's going to be an exciting thing as we move forward. All we've done is push the start button.
I think you've done a bit more than that. I totally agree. And I think, IAIA, that is our intention. We do feel that there is a responsibility and there's a role to play in making this as live a discussion document, subject matter as possible. And that's why it's encouraging that we've also got, the partnerships with those various organizations around the world. But maybe one lighter one to finish with. And I know you all have your biases, but as you've gone through this process, what gives you most hope, or what do you really have a soft spot for in terms of an energy type? Are you hydrogen guys? Are you biomass fans, or what is it? I mean, there must be one where you have a soft spot for.
Well, I'm going to cop out on directly answering that, because the answer to questions like this is always, it depends. And from what we've learned, I mean, it depends on the location. Does it suit one type versus another? Will the risks, environmental or social, be overwhelming that you don't want to go for one particular energy type, or one is a better option? Will it lead to a loss of ecosystems and their services and habitats, and loss of biodiversity? And if it's a large intervention or development, Will it mean people are relocated or alienated from the resources they depend on or lose livelihood opportunities? And these are all the kinds of questions I would have to be able to answer before suggesting I have a preference. So the answer, as always, is, for me, it depends.
All right, Barry, and it depends. Miles, I know you're a hydro guy.
Well, you know what? I started my career off as an extractive industry guy. And some years back, I saw the light, and, renewables are coming. But I got involved through the International Hydropower Association into sustainable hydropower. And it was sort of a natural progression. It was an interesting topic. Hydropower has had a very bad rap in the past, but there's a tremendous opportunity to make it sustainable. And I think for me, one of the things about hydropower is, in a lot of ways, it's a bridge almost in the energy transition, in that it can provide baseload power equivalent to what we can do from fossil fuels. And at the same time, while we're dealing better and developing better storage capacity so that we can bring on variable energy sources like wind and solar. And so hydropower, I think, is that transition in the transition, so to speak. And it also brings up another big important question. I also see one of our future challenges for humanity is not just climate change, but also water, and how we manage water and how we use water for power. And so I think the combination of those two, I'm betting on hydro.
Very good. Well, look, all that remains is for me to thank both of you, both for doing this short video, but also obviously for the work that you've invested in getting this global guidance published. So as we've said repeatedly, this is the start of that next phase of the process. And we really look forward to engaging with everyone, as many people as possible, in terms of making sure that we do make the energy transition a sustainable one. So thank you all.